Let's get started. So first, a couple of announcements. Homework 5 will be out today, as usual at 6 p.m. and it's due a week from now, that is 11/29. And yeah, so it's as usual, it has 4 problems and everything. And the TAs are grading exam 2. They're about halfway done, and hopefully they'll be done by Wednesday. I told them to finish by then, and I think we're on track for that. And if not, we'll see how soon they can do it. Okay. And any questions about exam, the grades? Yeah.
So homework 5 will be due next Monday, and then homework 6 will be out next Monday.
Yeah, so homework 6 is the one that will be short, right? So it won't have a full week. It'll only have 5 days to it. So it'll only have fewer problems, and that's so that you have time to read the solutions. Okay. Because our exam is really on Monday or Tuesday, I forget. It's very early. Any other questions? Okay. So let's get started. So last class we did 2 things. One was Weiss's theorem, which was this amazing, very general theorem, but also kind of a buzzkill, right? It basically said anything that you'd like to compute, any question, any meta question that you'd like to answer about programs is unsolvable. Okay. So that was a bummer, but then we said, okay, maybe that was because we were aiming for too much power with our meta questions. Like if you want to argue about Turing machines, maybe that's too much. Let's look at some simpler models, which are interesting by themselves, and those for which we can perhaps still answer these meta questions. We took that as our motivation, but the specific example that we were looking at, context-free grammars, have their own history and their importance within computer science. They arise, as I said, in linguistics, and they're very central in programming languages. Okay. So we saw what context-free grammars were, we saw a definition, an example, and what we'll do today is to investigate this model of computation. We define that as a set of rules, but from that we could also define a model of computation. Every context-free grammar define a function and define languages as well. All right. And today what we'll do is understand what CFGs do, like compare their power to regular languages, to Turing machines, and things like that. Okay, so just to recall, context-free grammars were basically, we had a set of variables, an alphabet or terminals, rules, and a start symbol. Okay, and so given any grammar, G, we get a corresponding function fg, right, or a language lg. Okay, and these were basically fg of x is 1 if x can be derived, I should say sigma star here, from the start symbol. If there is a sequence of rules that you can apply starting from the start symbol leading to a string x, then x is in the language, or fg of x is 1 and is 0 else. Okay, so this was a basic definition that we had. So let's look at the power of context-free languages. And we already saw that they are potentially more powerful than regular languages in the sense that they could compute at least one function which was not regular. So last class, we saw the language L, which is 0 to the n, 1 to the n, and is greater than or equal to 0, is context free. right? We saw a simple language for it, the grammar for it, which was, S goes to okay, so this was the grammar which gave us 0 to the n, 1 to the n. Okay, so let's investigate this further, right? So far, it's not even clear how context-free languages compare to regular languages. So what do you think? Which is more powerful, or are they incomparable? For looking at this, at least there is one function which is not regular but is context-free. But what can you say more generally? How can I compare context-free to regular languages? Any guesses? As it turns out, luckily for us, we don't have to, I mean, they are comparable and you can order them nicely. So I clean every regular language is also context-free. What does this mean? For every DFA-D, there exists a grammar, there exists a CFG-G such that the function computed by D of X is exactly the function computed by the grammar. Okay, so the languages are exactly equivalent, and you can do this for every DFA. Okay, so let's try and prove this. I mean, prove meaning let's see why this is true, really, right? It's saying for any DFA that you have, I can build an equivalent grammar for which the function is the same. Okay, so let me set up the notation, and then maybe you can come up with the solution yourself. So let's say I have a DFA-D, right? It has some transition function and some collection of accepting states. And suppose there were C states in total. Okay, and there are 0 through C, and we want to come up with a context-free grammar which kind of mimics the behavior of the DFA. Okay, any suggestions on how I can do it? So remember, the thing in context-free grammars is you're still applying local rules. Each time you can replace one variable on an expression that you have by following some rule. Okay, how can I exploit that to somehow compute a DFA? Okay, so let's do an example just to kind of get a hint. Suppose I have suppose I'm not drawing all the edges, I just drew 2 edges here. I have the start state, then I have the state 1, state 2, and maybe from 0, when I see the bit 0, the DFA is transitioning to 1. When I'm in state 0 and I see bit 1, I go to state 2. Okay, so how can I capture this behavior in a context-free grammar? So let me give a hint. Let me introduce. So we have to decide what the variables are going to be, right? So I'm going to say have a variable for each state in the DFA. Okay, so I'm going to define a grammar where the variables are, let's say, x0, x1. Okay, let me not use x, it might get confusing. So v0, v1, v2, all the way up to vc minus 1 are the variables. Okay, and the terminals are just the usual 0, 1. Okay, and imagine you have a variable on top of each of these states. So what should the start variable from my context-free grammar be? Any guesses? Well, wherever you are kind of starting, right? So let's just start with that as a hint. So starting variable is v0. But now what should the rules be? Yeah? Yeah, so even though they seem to be talking about apples and oranges, right? DFA, we think of it as some forward processing computation. I read a bit, I do something, okay? Whereas in context-free grammar, you're somehow generating things. I replace a variable and I generate something, okay? There is this somewhat of a flip view, but you know, if you just backtrack that, somehow when I'm in state 0, when I read 0, I go to state 1. Okay. Alternate way to think about this, when I jump from state 0 to state 1, I produce a 0. Okay. It's kind of just a slightly different mindset for looking at the same things. So I'm going to use that to define my rules. So I'm going to set up some, these are the things. Example rules are going to be v0 can be replaced with 0, v1. Okay. So whenever I see the bit 0, I transition to state 1. Alternately, whenever I see v0, I can replace it with 0, v1. Okay. And I can also replace it with 1, v2. Okay, and so on and so forth. So basically, for every transition that you have in your DFA, I introduce a rule. Okay. So idea for each transition. Suppose I had a transition T of I comma A goes to state J. Okay. Add a rule Vi goes to AVJ. Okay, yeah. Well, it's sort of, but you know, if you think of the DFA, you have many transitions, right? And the number of rules we have is exactly equal to the number of transitions that you have. So in terms of actual, like, you know, representation, it's roughly the same. For every edge, I have a rule. Do you think we're just interpreting rules as edges, really? Okay. So I'm adding a bunch of rules which correspond to the transitions. The only thing missing is if I just do this, I haven't taken into account the set of accepting states, right? If I keep doing this, I'll always have a variable in any derived expression. I need some way to get rid of the final variable and only have something which depends on the terminals, right? So how can I do that? So what should be a way? How can I capture the set of accepting states? Yeah. Okay, but how do I get rid of the variable in the end? That, I mean, I need to get expression which only involves the terminals in a context-free grammar. Yeah. Yeah. So is there a solution there too? Yeah, exactly. So same thing. So basically, we somehow need to get rid of the final variable, right? And that's the final idea. So idea 1, 2, for each accepting state in the DFA, state I in the DFA, add VI goes to epsilon. Okay, so that's it. So you end up with a very simple grammar, simple in the sense that you have your transition function and you have exactly that many rules, and any string is derivable in this grammar if and only if the DFA would accept this string. Okay. So I'm going through this example in a bit more detail because there is this difference in perspective, right? In a DFA, you read a bit and then you do something. In context-free grammar, somehow you generate a string when some conditions are met. But both are kind of the same thing. All right? Any questions about this? So at the very least, now we know that every regular language is context-free, and there are some languages which are context-free but not regular. So context-free grammars are potentially a more powerful model than DFAs. Okay? So let me summarize. CFGs are strictly more powerful than DFAs and NFAs and so on. Okay? All right. And so you can have actually a lot of fun trying to come up with context-free grammars for various kinds of languages, just as it's fun to come up with, to check whether or not certain languages are regular, you can try to do something similar for context-free grammars. So there's some principles that you can follow when trying to design context-free grammars. And as I said at the beginning, designing context-free grammars is actually an important part of many programming languages. I mean, not for the considerations that we are looking at, but you should need to understand where these things come from. So let's say tips for designing context-free grammars. Okay. Now suppose I give you some language L, and I ask you to design a context-free grammar for it. Check, come up with some rules which would exactly generate this context-free grammar. Some things you can follow are, you can break up the language L into simpler pieces. Okay? So meaning, suppose I have a grammar G1 which computes a language L1. I have a grammar G2 which computes a language L2. My claim is then L1 union L2 is also context-free. There's a question, how do we account for rules like A to A? I'm not sure what you mean by account. You can have those rules, but they wouldn't affect whether or not a string belongs to the language. A string X belongs to the language if and only if there is some derivation using some collection of rules to get that string from the start symbol. It doesn't say anything about having some bogus or bad rules in your grammar. Okay? But you can avoid some trivial rules like A to A or B to B if you want to. Yeah? It will still have a variable on top of it, right? It has a loop, but then it reads a 0 and goes to there, or it reads a 1 and goes to that point. right? So that part is fine. Like even this example, we have A appearing on both sides, but it's changing. There's a 0 in front and so on. Okay. So my claim is that if I have a grammar for L1 and a grammar for L2, then the union is also context free. I can combine pieces or take their unions by context free grammars relatively easily. Why? Any suggestions? How can I design a grammar for L1 union L2? Yeah? Yeah, basically take the union of the rules, but just keep different sort of variable names and everything, right? So along with that, we just need to add like a splitting rule at the beginning. Okay, so let's say S1 is start symbol, start of G1, S2 is start of G2. So you add new start S and a rule S goes to S1 or S2. Okay, so basically we are adding one new rule and one new variable S, which goes to S1 or S2 and then keeps everything the same. Okay, so in some sense you're just like okay. So that's one way to use the power of context free grammars. And another very interesting aspect of context free grammars is the following. Tip number 2 is that CFGs can basically do some kind of linking of strings. Okay, again, this is mostly clear from examples. This is not a formal principle. This is just like an intuitive guide, like a heuristic for you to come up with ways to design CFGs really, right? So what do I mean by this? Somehow, if you think of the language that we looked at, 0 to the n, 1 to the n is greater than or equal to 0, right? So one way to think of this, think of what you're trying to do here is whenever I generate a 0, I need to generate a 1. Okay, kind of on both sides, right? Generate a 0, 1, generate a 0, I need to generate a 1. So you can pair up things and you can try and exploit that. Okay, so meaning A2, 0, A1. Here I'm linking 0 and 1. Whenever you generate a 0, you kind of generate a 1 on the other side. Okay, so that's another sort of important heuristic that we can try and exploit in designing context free grammars. And of course, tip 3 is what we already saw. It's not really a tip, but it's more like an observation that regular languages are context free. Okay, they're like these 3 different pieces that you can try and put together, and just as guides. Often sometimes you might have to go beyond that, but these are good starting points. So let's take these as guides and come up with context free grammars for one language and see how we can kind of test our skills. Okay, so let me define this language add, which is 0 to the m, 1, 0 to the n, 1, 0 to the n plus m. Okay. So you have a string of zeros followed by 1, a string of zeros followed by 1, but then the final number of zeros is the sum of the total number of zeros you have up so far. Okay. We saw something like this in one of our homework problems where we showed that this language is not regular. Right? We use the pumping lemma to show that addition cannot be computed by DFS, but it can be computed by context-free grammars. So my claim is that this language is context-free, and there is a simple set of rules that can be used to generate this language. How can we do that? Any suggestions? Let me draw a picture, but which might make things clearer. So what are this kind of strings that we are trying to generate? So we have a string of zeros, m, and there is a 1. Maybe I should use different colors. We have a string of zeros, there's n of them, there's a 1, and then we have a very long string of zeros. Okay. So how can I generate these things? Any ideas? Well, let me draw one addition to this picture, and hopefully one of you will come up with a way. So I need m plus n zeros. I'm going to split it up into n zeros first, followed by m zeros. Okay. I'm deliberately pairing things up here in a way for us to use our heuristic. Context-free grammars are very good at kind of syncing things on ends of strings, right? So m plus n, I split it into n zeros first, followed by m zeros. Okay. Can I do something now? Let's group this piece and then try to do this. Right? I can try and do something like that. So any suggestions on how I might do it? Like what rules might be useful here? Yeah? All right, that's an excellent suggestion. Let's try and do that. So the idea is to pair up the blue portion, not blue, no, blue portions and cyan portions, right? So what do I mean? So think of this portion, right? I want to somehow use a correspondence between these two things. Okay. All right. So the suggestion was, first let me add a rule, let's say a, which goes to 0, maybe a and 0. Okay. This is, I want to keep doing this until I kind of generate the two end pieces. Okay, I apply this rule many times and then I keep getting zeros, but at some point I need to transition out of it. Okay, so use this to generate the starting m and ending m zeros. Okay, So I'm linking the first and the ending zeros, keep going, keep going. I still have a variable in between. At some point, I need to generate the blue piece. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the one we're going to generate later. Yeah, that's true. Let's say 1. Okay, so we keep applying this rule. Kind of this is meant to generate the Sion portion, right? You have generated many zeros. Actually, I can be fancy. Not like that, but okay. And at some point, I need to switch. So what should I do next? I need to switch first to generate a 1 and then keep going kind of the same stuff, but now generate the blue portion. Yeah? Yeah. A goes to 1B. And then do the same thing again. So B goes to 0, B, 0. Okay. And the termination part is just B goes to 1. Right? So I'm using this kind of heuristic of linking up zeros to kind of match the things from end to end. Okay. So let's parse this more slowly. Okay. So the idea is this would, if I keep applying, my starting symbol is A. So start is A. Okay. So if I keep applying this, I end up, so at some point, I just get a sequence of M zeros followed by A and M zeros. So no matter what I do, I'm only going to match up zeros equally on both sides of A. Okay. And then pretty much the only way I can break out of this is to use the 1B rule, from which I get 1B 0 to the M. Okay. And now there's only one variable B. And the only thing I can do with it is either of those two rules, right? If I keep applying B, the first rule again and again, I just get okay. No matter how many times I apply it, I'm generating a equal number of zeros before and after B, right? And that's it. Now, if I replace it with a 1, the final rule, I get 0 to the n, 0 to the m is just 0 to the m plus n. Okay. Any questions about this? Yeah? Yeah, so basically here, going from here, we are only applying this rule repeatedly. And to here, we are applying this rule. Right? So when I apply that rule, I'm replacing A with 1B. In context-free grammar, you take an entire string and you can replace a single variable in that string with the rule. Okay? So let me summarize. The set of variables is A comma B. The terminals are just 0 comma 1. And these rules are A to 0 A 0, 1B, and B to 0 B 0 /1. Okay. and start equals A. And this is a grammar which does addition, which is amazing. Yeah. Are you suggesting a way to kind of reduce the number of variables, or?
Yeah, just another set of.
Oh, I see. I see. You're saying like, maybe you're suggesting a way to make perhaps combine these things, like go to 0, A0, and
Just
AY, BY, AB. Okay, so you're saying basically go to
like A is with function zeros and B is not a function.
right. Okay, so but then the problem is that it is just a bunch of zeros. They need not be of the same length, right? So if I do them separately, I might end up with plugging in different length zeros. Right, so here we are really exploiting the fact that whenever I generate 1 0 in front of like A, I also generate the same number like immediately following A.
Yeah, so I can
I see, like maybe something like this.
Yeah.
Right, but then somehow I think what you do here might be decoupled from what you do here. It could be made to work, I think, but it seems a bit more complicated than this if you don't exploit the pairing immediately. Okay? Yeah, go ahead.
But if you went from the inside out instead of you kind of like building from the outside in, would it pretty much just be the same thing except you start with
It's usually pretty hard to do inside out because once I do something inside, I can't add things in the end unless I already have a variable, right? But then if I have two variables there, the set of rules I apply to them could be completely asynchronous. Okay, and yeah, that's an important point to keep in mind, that somehow when you pair up things, it's easier to pair up from the ends rather than from the middle. Okay. Okay, so let's do one more example to kind of get a good intuitive sense for this. And this is the example that you sure was not regular in the exam. So let's say example 3 is I forget what I called it in the exam, but let's say L is X such that odd length first, middle, and end symbols are same. Okay. So in the exam, you showed that this language is not regular. It's not a regular language. You could use pumping lemma for it. And I'm asking to show that it is actually context free. The set of all strings X, which are odd length, the first symbol, the last symbol, and the exact middle one are the same. Right. So for example, things like 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1. Right? So the first, the end, and the middle are the same. And the same things for like 0. Any suggestions how to get started? Yeah?
So we can have two different states that the starting symbol equals to that's 1, E1, then E will equal to 1.
Okay, so I think what you're suggesting is let's use a abstraction that you can split up languages into pieces and try to come up with the context-free grammars for them. Okay, so let me define L0 as a piece where X starts, odd length, start, end, comma, middle equals 0. And L1 is the same thing. Odd length, start, end, middle, all equal 1. Okay? So if I can come up with a grammar for L0, I can easily translate, come up with a similar one for L1, and then just take the union of the two things. Right? So the L that I have is just exactly L0 union L1. Right? So suffices to have a grammar for L0. Okay? Now, how can I come up with a grammar for L0? I need this, let's say, the starting symbol, the middle symbol, and the end symbol to be exactly the same. And they have to be 0, really. Any guesses? It's easy to ensure that this first and the ending symbol are zeros. Right? How can I do that? Let's say I want to generate only strings where the first and the ending symbols are zeros. How can I do that? Well, I can have some variable, let's say A, and have the rule A goes to, let's say 0, B0. Okay. So now I generated the first and the last 0. Yeah? Okay, so let's see. And the suggestion was B goes to 0 and C goes to 0, 1. Oh, C 0, C. This might be problematic, right? Because you might apply different rules to the C's. Yeah?
B equals to 0, B0 equals to 20, 1, equals to.
Okay, so and B goes to 1. This almost works, except you're only generating zeros and zeros and ones and ones. So they're always equal. Yeah? Right, exactly. So, just let me add a couple of things here to make it complete. Okay. So the main thing we want is, the middle symbol should be 0. On either side, I just need an equal number of zeros or ones. I don't care which one they are, as long as they're equal length, right? So this ensures that. I start with A. I add in my first and last zeros. And my goal now, B should go to any string where the middle element is 0. That's the only constraint. And this I can do just by adding the rules that have been suggested so far. Okay? So let me abbreviate this even further and just this. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. B goes to 0. Yes, so there's.
A goes to 0.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you. Right, because here also the first, last, and middle strings are the same. Yeah. Bits are all 0. Yeah. I guess, well, you could actually, you can combine the two. You're absolutely right. Maybe I can just add one B1 here. No, but then, yeah, exactly. You'll end up with the same thing. Yeah. Okay. So there are all these kind of, but these are the heuristics that we can use to come up with context-free grammars. Okay. And as I said, they are very important and often studied in various fields. But for us, what we're interested in is to kind of understand at least what the basic model of computation is, and then start reasoning about the model, right? So what do I mean by that? We would like to understand the relative power of context-free grammars. So we know right now that they are more powerful than regular languages, but we don't even know if they are computable. What's an upper bound on their power? We do believe that everything under the sun can be computed by Turing machine, but let's actually see if it's true or not, at least for this concrete case. Okay? Meaning, suppose I give you a grammar G and a string X, which is a sequence of terminals. Is fg of x equals 1. Can we compute this function? Is the context-free grammar function computable? Can I check that? Okay. So let's take a 5-minute break, and then we come back. We'll answer this question. This is actually a little bit tricky. It's not immediately clear how you can design an algorithm which can check whether or not a string is derivable from a given set of rules. Okay. So we'll come to that in a little bit after the break. Resume. So the question we are asking is kind of a computational question, right? I give you a grammar, give me an algorithm basically that can check whether or not a string is derivable from the grammar. Okay. So far we've been kind of eyeballing it and saying, okay, this is a language by looking at some examples, given a language, I can define a grammar, right? But so what could be the tricky scenarios, right? So imagine I have some grammar. Again, another example. I have S goes to 0, A, S, 0, 1, and maybe A goes to epsilon. Okay. I just wrote 2 rules here, and I give you any string X. So the input to me is these are the rules, and I give you a string X, which is in 0, 1 star. You have to tell me whether or not this string X is derivable from this grammar. And how can I do that? How can I go about checking whether a string X is derivable in this grammar? What should I do to get started? Any suggestions? Just tell me whatever comes to your mind, like what is the first thing and so on. To ask you, give you a string X, tell me whether or not the string X is derivable from the grammar. What would you try and do? Yeah? Yeah, so the basic idea is, maybe I'll just try and start matching like greedily. Can I generate the first symbol by applying some rule, and then so on and so forth. That's the idea. But sometimes you might make a bad choice, right? And that could be very problematic. So here, at least that's not the case. This is a simple enough grammar where if I just keep doing things like trying to match things greedily, I'll find the answer. But that might not be the case all the time. Okay. So idea, pick rules that could generate more and more version of X. Okay. And the other suggestion in the chat is that go from the start symbol. Let me forget computational efficiency and everything like that. I really want to just check whether or not the string is reachable. So the other suggestion is go from the start and explore all possible paths. I'm kind of going to have an exploding tree where I start from the start, then have all possible rules, and then all possible rules, and all possible rules, and so on and so forth. But when I do that, at least with this, it seems very problematic because I get rid of S and S appears again. Okay, and I keep doing this. At some point, I need to somehow check whether or not the string is reachable, and it's not clear how I can do it in finite time. Right? Like let's say I'd say S, you go to 0A, S0, and 1. And then here I have so many options. I could replace A to get 0, S0, or I could replace S again to get 0A, S0, or 0A, 1, 0, and so on and so forth. Okay, it's really fast growing tree, and I don't know how to do it, like check whether or not I'm done. Okay, so this was actually an important hurdle. There's another session which is if the current string you're generating exceeds the length of X, you can stop. Well, that could be problematic because maybe variables will disappear. Right, so here, for instance, I'm doing A, but I might replace A with epsilon only in the end. It could still be an issue. But fortunately, there is a simple way to get around these sort of loop issues by pre-processing the grammar a little bit. Okay? And this part actually comes from linguistics. Many of you might have heard of Noam Chomsky for different reasons, but his real claim to fame is in formal languages. And there is something called Chomsky normal form. Okay, or CNF. And this is basically a way to write the grammar rules to make things easier to derive. Okay, so suppose I give you a grammar. We'll say it's in Chomsky normal form if the following set of conditions hold for every rule. All right. So when we defined context-free grammars, there were no constraints on the shape of on what the rules could look like. As long as they had one variable on the left-hand side, anything was allowed on the right-hand side. Okay. But in Chomsky normal form, we're going to put some constraints on the rules so that things will be easier for us to derive. Okay. So what are these constraints? So first, every rule is only, for the most part, rules can only be of two forms. either you have a variable going to two variables, okay, or you have a variable going to a terminal. That's it. Okay, so in the original way we define context-free grammars, the right-hand side could be a mix, right? You could have 0A0, you could have 0A1, you could have 0A as 0 and all those things. But in Chomsky normal form, none of those are allowed. You can only have a rule which is variable to two variables or a variable to a terminal. Very simplistic. Okay? Except there is an exception. Exception, you could potentially have start to the empty string, to epsilon. Okay? Except for this one rule that you could violate the constraints that we have, every other rule has this form. Okay, that's the main constraint, and the second constraint is start symbol does not occur on the right hand side. Okay, start symbol does not occur on the right hand side of any rule. Kind of jumping ahead, this goes back to the suggestion that was made earlier for trying to check whether or not X is derivable. Right? To keep doing this, the problem here is I don't know when to stop. Can keep going, but then A goes to epsilon. I can get rid of all of the copies of A for free. So I can't just like put a bottleneck on the length, right? Which is annoying, and this modification kind of gets around that for us, right? You can't have, except for the start symbol, you really don't have any variables going to epsilon. Okay, and variables always go to either of these two simple forms. Okay, so remark A going to epsilon is not allowed for anything but the start. Okay, and similarly, is A to AB A? Is this allowed? No. How about A to AB? Is this allowed? Yes. Yeah, this could be allowed. How about A to AS, where S is start? No. Right? A to 0A? No. A to 0A0? No. So none of the rules which look like this are allowed in Chomsky normal form. Yeah? Yeah, so you can't combine variables and terminals, and you can only really have two symbols on the right hand side. So both of those reasons you cannot have such a thing. Okay, so let me also write that down. A to, let's say, A, B, C, this is also not allowed. Okay, and you can't also have rules of the form A goes to B. Right? Because Whenever I have a variable to variable rule, I need to have two variables. I can't just have a single variable. This is like a silly rule, A to B, right? What purpose is it going to serve? You're going to replace B with something, and might as well get rid of this rule and add those things. Okay? In a sense, it's kind of a way to get rid of all the unnecessary rules that you might have in some meaningful way. Okay? All right. So let's do an example. Again, we'll go back to our favorite example. The first grammar that we saw, which was, now let's say I have S goes to 0 as 0, and okay. Suppose this is our grammar. I think we are using A actually, so let me use that. Right, so and LG was just 0 to the n, 1 to the n. Okay, this is not in Chomsky normal form because you have this 0A1 and then A is going to epsilon, not good. Right, so how do I get rid of this? How can I make it be in Chomsky normal form? Is it even possible? That's what we're going to study. So not in Chomsky normal form. Okay. So what we'll do is there's a very simple transformation procedure. Simple in the sense that, actually it's a bit tedious, but conceptually it is simple, meaning you go step by step, looking at all violations of rules from the Chomsky normal constraints and try to fix them one after the other. Okay? So claim for every grammar G, there exists a grammar G bar such that G bar is in Chomsky normal form, okay, and this grammar is equivalent to the grammar that we started out with. Okay, give me any grammar, I can pre-process the rules. In fact, I can do this in an automated way, as we'll see, such that the new grammar is in Chomsky normal form and is exactly equivalent in power and in computation to the original grammar. Okay? So how can I prove this? So why is this true? Well, the reason it's true is basically we look at each of the rule violations and try and fix them. So what do I mean? You could have, there are several ways in which you might not satisfy the Chomsky normal form conditions, right? So you could say, no start symbol on right hand side. So let me write down all the constraints that we have. We can't have variables and terminals on the right hand side. You can't mix variables and terminals. That's not allowed. Okay, and no rules of the form A to B. All right, and no rules of the form A2, A1, A2, A3, so on. Okay, You can't have more than 3 variables on the right hand side. Now you can't have multiple terminals appearing on the right hand side. So there is a strong laundry list of no's allowed, right? That we have to get around. Okay, and you'll see how to fix the main things, and this is pretty much enough to basically ensure you fix everything. There's one more thing: no start symbol on the right hand side, and no rules of the form A to epsilon. Like, even this is part of the thing, right? Okay. So there are so many things. Let's start just by going one after the other pretty quickly. To fix 0, what should I do? So what is 0 saying? I can't have the start symbol appear on the right hand side of any rule. How could I get rid of that? Any suggestions? Well, think of something silly, right? I'm saying you can't do a start symbol on the right hand side. Yeah? Yeah, really think like a lawyer. How do you cheat around these things? So what you do is, okay, so you create a new start variable. S1, and say S1 goes to S. Okay, so I have this dummy start variable S1. I said S1 goes to S, and now S1 is never going to appear on the right hand side of anything. I didn't do much, but I got around this rule. All right, and now how do I fix 1? We can't have variables and terminals on the right hand side. You cannot have the variables and terminals appearing side by side. How can I fix that? Yeah? Yeah, exactly, right? Again, essentially, like, let's say, create a new variable, VA, for every terminal A, okay? And you add the rule VA goes to A, okay? And in every rule where A appeared on right, replace it with VA. Okay, so for example, suppose I had a rule saying, okay, A goes to maybe B times like 0 times B. Okay, so what I've done so far is I create a new variable V0 which goes to 0, and I'm going to replace this rule with A goes to V0B. Okay, the effect is the same, right? You go to V0 and B and then replace V0 with 0, nothing's changing in effect. But now you're satisfying the constraints. Okay? All right. And to fix, let's say, what do we have? 2. So 2 was no rules of the form A to B. How do I get rid of these? A and B are variables, yeah? We could do that, or I think what I'm going to say is the same, but I think maybe it's easier to do it this way. So basically what we are going to do is drop this rule but add a to blah if there was a rule b to blah. Okay, so you are going to do a to b and then you have to apply some rule to b, right? You're kind of shortcutting them. Why do you have this b as an intermediary? Just throw it out and jump directly to all the rules that you can get to from b and have them start from a. Add them. You're not throwing away the rules starting from b, but just adding these new rules that start from a, but the ending point is what you had from b. Yeah. S1 to S and then right. No, but we are not adding S1 on the left hand side, right? On the right hand side. So the only constraint was that the starting symbol should not be on the right hand side. S1 could, it could go to multiple things, but there's nothing leading to S1. Okay, so that part is fine, I think. If S was going to something else, S1 is a new variable. So it's not in any of the other rules, and it just short-circuited S, and right now, I would say S1 goes to blah, blah, blah. That's it. No, we're not substituting yet. We're just adding, we're replacing this one rule. S will have its own part to play because we don't know what it's going to do. I'm just dropping this one rule. Okay, so maybe let me, so let's say an example is get S1 to S and S goes to 0 S0, let's say. Okay, we have this. So now this would be translated to S1 goes to 0 S1 slash epsilon and S goes to. Okay, so we're not replacing S with S1 or anything that dramatic. We're being very kind of greedy and iterative. Okay, we're just dropping this one rule and adding all the rules that come out of S onto the right hand side of S1. Okay, yeah. Yes. So right now it violates it, and we have to fix these things again and again, right? So we're fixing them one at a time, and when you fix something, you might break something else, and then you have to redo these things. Okay, and the order in which you do these things doesn't matter, as we'll see. Basically, every time you are minimizing at least some number of violations, so in the end, you'll be fine. Okay, but let's try and have some heuristics for how to fix each of these things. Okay, all right. So finally, there are other things to fix. Okay, if you go back up, so we can't have rules where you have multiple variables on the right hand side. Okay, so to fix 3, no multiple variables on right hand side. Okay, meaning you can't have something like A goes to A1, A2, A3. Not multiple, no more than 2 variables. How can I fix this? Yeah. Yeah. So basically, I can add as many variables I want, right? maybe, this linguistics was a necessary class for lawyers, right? I can add this, like B1 goes to B2, B2 goes to, actually here, just do this. Okay. So the idea was, you keep grouping 2 at a time. It doesn't matter if I do it in immediately 1 step or if I do it in 3 steps. As long as there are no other branches being allowed, I'm fine. So idea, for each rule, so we need to make sure that the rules never kind of collide with each other. So every time I'm going to introduce new variables for that specific rule. You could probably save some things, if you do it more carefully, but that's not at all important for us. For each rule of the form A1 to A2 up to some AL, add new variables. Let's say, B1, B2, so on. Okay, yeah.
For the case to get an even number of days, so we have A1, A2, A3, A4, how do we make sure that we don't recreate the A3 rule?
No, it should be fine because you're adding new variables, completely new variables for each rule every time. So if I had A1, A2, A3, A4, for instance, what would happen? So example, if I had A2, A1, A2, A3, A4, I would just create, this would be replaced with A goes to A1, B1, okay? And then B1 goes to A2, B2, B2 goes to A3, A4. That's it, okay?
Should the numbers be A1, B1?
No, I think this is fine, right? You kind of jump to the next variable. I don't want to reuse any variables. I'm not trying to save anything. So I'm adding new variables here. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Sorry. Thanks. You're right. Yeah. Okay, so this is a way to, just have multiple things. I'm just doing 2 at a time. And we kind of pretty much done with all the main fixes. And how about this? So let's say we took care of this guy. I mean, at least we have a way to fix this. We have a way to fix this. We have a way to fix this. And we have to do these 2 things, right? So let's say I ask you to fix 4, which is no rule of the form A goes to A1, A2, A3 up to AK. I can't have multiple terminals on the right hand side. How can I fix this? Yeah?
Have each new variable for each of those derivatives and then do the same thing.
Yeah, exactly, right? I can do kind of the same thing really, which is so add new variables and repeat trick for 3, right? So meaning if I had something like, A goes to 0, 1, 0, this would be replaced with A goes to A1, A2, A2 goes to A3, 0. Oh, that's not allowed. Okay, and then I would have A1 to 0, A3 to 1, A4 to 0. Okay, again, there are different ways to think about this. You can say, I replace all the terminals with the corresponding variables and then use the trick from before. That's also fine. Yeah.
We can't replace A4 with A1.
A4 with A1. Well, I mean, that is not allowed, right? You know, you can't have a single variable on the right-hand side. Okay. Because, I mean, you definitely don't want to introduce violations, new violations. Okay. And again, you're right, you know, you might be able to save in terms of redundancy in the number of rules, but that's not our focus. It's fine if you have multiple kind of, you know, redundant rules. It's not going to hurt us too much. Okay. It's not going to hurt the actual computation. Any other questions? Okay, so we got rid of 4. The last one is 5, which is no rules of the form A to epsilon. So what can you do to fix this? Any suggestions? Yeah? Well, actually, let me say, so again, we're going to be very sort of non-creative here, which is A to epsilon, you're going to do the following. Drop the rule, and for every earlier rule, create a with A on right hand side, just drop it. Create new rules without A. Okay. So meaning, I mean, A to epsilon just means that you're replacing A with epsilon, right? So just do it within the rule. You know, create new rules where you do this. So for instance, suppose I had, you know, something like B goes to 0, A, 1, and then A goes to epsilon. Okay. Maybe this could be confusing. So let's say it's something like this. Right? So then what I'm going to do is create new rules, which is just B to C. Okay. This kind of, okay, I fixed one problem, there's one more problem, but then, you know, I'm going to repeat the process again. Okay. So which is I got rid of A to epsilon, but now B to C is kind of violates this constraint that you can only have one variable on the right hand side. So I can repeat everything. I can try to fix those things again. Yeah. If there are other rules. Well, not really. We don't touch those rules. If there are other rules from A, we shouldn't touch them. Why should we touch them? Think of it this way, right? You know, we are really only addressing how to handle this rule. The others will keep as it is. We'll worry about them later. Okay? Yeah?
So the case like you also understand that there's like A1 and 2. In that case, we still have that B goes to C and we're just drop.
I think it should be fine, right? You know, you're fixing things one at a time without kind of having a good global picture, but you don't have to worry about the global picture.
Would that change the language? another possibility of it's still argument. A1, A2.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. I see. So I just meant that you drop this rule. So you do keep this, but add B to C. Yeah, absolutely. Is this what you're saying? Yeah, of course. Yeah. Right. Yeah, thanks. So I meant to say that you drop this rule. You don't drop B to AC because that could be important. Okay. So for all rules where there is A on the right hand side, you add new rules. So you create new rules without A. Okay. So these are the fixes that you pretty much, these are the only things that you need. Again, as I said, you're really doing a laundry list style of things where you go one rule at a time and fix them. All right. And I think you should, when we try to do these things, it's very tedious. I'm not a big fan of making you work through these things, but the Chomsky normal form by itself is very helpful when you think of answering questions about grammars on computers, as we'll see. There's a question in the chat: if you fix the original rules in arbitrary order, do you end up at the same set of CNF form rules? Probably not. That's actually a very good question. The question is like, what if I try to fix things in some different order? Could I end up with some different sets of rules? Potentially, you'll end up with different sets of rules. Whether I fix rules of type 1 or rules of type 2, etc., that could change the actual set of rules you write down, but it's not going to change the computation. Okay? Okay, so let's just do one short example of this entire process. So we have the grammar, S goes to 0S1 / epsilon, right? Which is a problem. So we said, okay, this doesn't satisfy CNF form. So we add a new start variable S1, which goes to S, and then you have S goes to 0S1 / epsilon. Okay, and now you process this to say, I have a unit rule. I have this S1 to S, which is not good. So the way to fix it is to short circuit it. Yeah. Oh, yeah, this should be S. Yeah. Okay. And yeah, you kind of, you have multiple violations here. First, S to epsilon should not be allowed, right? So let me fix that. And so I want to get rid of this rule, S to epsilon. So that means that for every rule which had S on the right-hand side, I create a new rule, right? So I get 0, 1 / epsilon. And here I have S to 0S1, that stays. But then I also get one which is just 0, 1. Okay, so let me explain that. So S1 to 0S1 becomes S1 to 0S1 and 0, 1. S to 0S1 becomes S to 0S1 and 0, 1. Okay, and you can do this again basically, right? So now we have multiple violations. I have two terminals here. I have a mix of terminals and variables. I need to fix those things. All right. Okay, so let me do one more step and then we'll be good. So let's say I want to get rid of, I'll do V0 S V1 01 / epsilon. Okay, so now I fixed the issue of having variables and terminals mix. Okay, now I only have either just variables on the right hand side or just terminals. Okay, and then you can fix more. Okay, I can fix that by splitting things up again and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, you will end up with some long set of rules, CNF. Okay. It sort of seems wasteful to have such a long list of rules which satisfy the Chomsky normal form, but it is a mechanical thing that's important. It kind of seems silly for us to do it, but when it's so mechanical, it is good because then you can just have a computer do it for you. We can have an algorithm which can do this processing. All right. So given this, we can now use the power of Chomsky normal form to understand how we can compute with context-free grammars. Okay. So meaning, here's a very simple result that for any context-free grammar, the function fg, I'm thinking of the terminals just being 0, 1 for now, is computable. Okay, meaning there is a Turing machine that can actually check whether or not a particular string is derivable from the Chomsky normal form, from this string. Yeah?
This is only for the CNF. If the CFG.
For any CFG. We're going to prove it for CNF, but we know that any G can be converted to CNF. Okay, so let's try and prove it. So in some sense, that's the reason why Chomsky normal form is so useful. Often, even when you have equivalent grammars, like, the people, when they write down the grammar for Python or Java, I said programming languages have their own grammars for them, defining whether or not a particular program is a valid program syntactically. There could be different grammars which produce the same thing, but some things are better useful for compilers than others. This is kind of similar. So step 1, convert G to a CNF G prime, G bar. We're going to follow this set of rules iteratively until you don't have anything more to fix, and find a grammar which is actually in the Chomsky normal form. Okay. And how can I do this next? How can I check Chomsky normal form? Any ideas? Okay, so I'll tell you the rough idea, right? So when we think of Chomsky normal form, we know all the rules. Okay, so let's abstract it out. So the input for us now is a grammar G bar in Chomsky normal form and a string X, right? And we want to check is fg bar of x equals 1. We want to compute fg of x. Is the string x derivable from this set of rules? How can I do this? Well, if I don't want to be very clever, what I can do is just imagine what the derivation should look like, right? I have some first step and then a second step and then a second, third step and so on until I get the string X. Okay? And the way I'm going to describe it, I'm really going to describe pseudocode. There's no point in trying to write it in Turing machine language. We're going to use recursion, that's fine. I'm just trying to come up with a Python program which can verify this. But what's the intuition? Any ideas on how I might do this? Like I've asked you, I gave you the set of rules. Tell me whether or not X is derivable from S. What could you do? Yeah?
Can we take the same approach we did earlier and track that closer?
Right. So the that's what you want to do, but I think the way you do it can make things much simpler. So if I use recursion, for instance, which is what Chomsky norm really allows us, it's very helpful. Okay. So let me say it this way, right? So what do we want? So we have S, and the first rule, suppose X is not a variable, not a single literal, is not of length 1. The first rule from S, there's only many options, but there are only of 2 types, really. Right, so you have to go to something which has 2 variables, right? And from here, this generates something, and this needs to generate something. Okay. First rule is S goes to some, A, B, and A has to generate something, B has to generate something. When you put the 2 together, you need to get X. Okay. So this suggestion, which is basically explore every possible branch and check if you get X in the end. That you can do, but you can do something a bit more efficient. So what I'm going to say is, so def check A comma Y. So return 1 if the variable A implies Y. Okay. I'm going to define recursive code. Right, so I'm going to define a new function check, which takes a variable name and a string as input and checks whether I can get Y from A by following some sequence of rules. And the way I'll do it is, if the length of Y is 1, how can I answer this? If there's only 1 literal, pretty much the only way is that rule has to be present, right? So if Y is 1, if A implies Y is a rule, output 1. Else, output 0. Okay? This is kind of the base case. And case 2, if the length of Y is greater than or equal to 2, then I'm just going to check some kind of brute force thing, which is for every rule A to B C, for every split Y is Y1, Y2, check if okay. So I'm basically checking all possible ways of splitting up Y into 2 pieces, right? And whatever first rule you apply, I need to get the first piece from B, the second piece from C. That's it. It's very brute force. But you can actually make this much more efficient if you want to. Okay? Any questions about this? As I said, you really, I'm kind of brute force enumerating or what the first rule should be. I check all possible A times B and all possible ways to split up X and check if that piece can be got from A and the other piece can be got from B recursively again and again. Okay. So this is the advantage of Chomsky normal form, that this recursion we know will stop because every time you are reducing the length at least by 1. Okay. So far we at least have that context-free grammars can be computed by Turing machines, which seems like an overkill. But next class we will see what else we can do with context-free grammars. Can we reason about context-free grammars better than we could reason about Turing machines? If I give you 2 context-free grammars, can you tell me are they computing the same function? If I give you a context-free grammar, can you tell me is it just generating the empty language, or is there some string which is present in the language? Okay, so all of those things we'll answer in the next lecture. All right, and I'll see you on Wednesday.